Mr. Davis did a great job explaining signal detection theory. I just need to do some reiteration. I really want to point out that the most important thing right here is experience and expectations. Here's the thing. You don't just record things like a recorder. Your brain decides what it's going to pay attention to. So signal detection theory says what we expect to hear to some extent is what we hear. If we know we're going to hear noise outside our classroom window, like Mr. Davis said, then we're going to ignore it because it's not important. It's not, and we know it's going to be there. The one thing I do want to explain though between habituation, and I'm going to use Mr. Davis's two examples, between habituation and sensory adaptation. So sensory adaptation is in the nerve cells in your nose. He was talking about coffee. Habituation is in your brain. So let me give you an example. If you're sniffing the coffee and you've done it for 30 seconds like Mr. Davis talked about, and then you don't smell it anymore. If I say, hey, do you notice the smell of that coffee? You can't, because it's your nose that said, I'm not going to pay attention to this anymore. So you can't just decide to pay attention to it anymore. That is sensory adaptation. You can't decide to say, oh, now I'm cold. So, and the other example I give of sensory adaptation, and it was on the pictures in the PowerPoint, was swimming. So you jump in the water and it's freezing. So think of the first time you jump in the water in the summer and it's freezing, and within a minute or two, you're not freezing anymore. Now, why? I mean, can you just have somebody say, now, do you notice that it's freezing? You'll go, actually, I don't, because your body has gotten used to it. The coffee, your nose has gotten used to it. Your senses have gotten used to it. Habituation is, if I point it out to you, if I say, hey, do you notice that sound outside? You're like, dang it, why did you point that out to me, right? Because my brain got used to it, and then you put my attention on it. Perfect example I did with my wife all the time is back in the day when we could go to movie theaters, I would say, do you hear all those people chewing that popcorn with their mouths open? She'd go, oh, why did you point that out to me, you jerk? That was habituation. Her brain had gotten used to it and tuned it out. But as soon as I pointed it out, then she noticed. So that's habituation. The coffee, the cold water is sensory adaptation. Even if I point it out, you aren't just going to notice. Okay. And I also want to point out when we talk about applying the threshold, there's often some confusion here. If we lower your threshold, it's easier for information to get into your brain. So in Mr. Davis's example of sleeping in the basement, if your parents aren't home, your threshold gets low. And any noise, you're going to go, oh, what was that? What was that? When your parents are home, your threshold goes up. And it's harder for that information to get up over that threshold. Okay. So that was a lot of review. I apologize. Now, I used to not teach signal detection theory because I just thought it was so obvious. But then it was on the test one year, and students said, why didn't you teach me signal detection theory? So here we go. This is about how we detect a signal. So if the stimulus is present and the response is present, so there's a loud noise and I jump, we would call that a hit. Let's say there's a loud noise outside of Mr. Davis's classroom. The stimulus is there, but Mr. Davis doesn't notice it because he has become habituated to it. We would call that a miss. Now this is the obvious one. If there is no stimulus and no response, that is a correct rejection. There was no noise and I didn't jump. Well, there you go. If there is no stimulus though, and there is a response, that is what they call a false alarm. Now think about that. You've done that before, where you say, what'd you say? And your friend goes, I didn't say anything. That's a false alarm. So again, I want you to think of your vision, your hearing, your smell, all those other things. We're not just recorders. Our brain decides what we're going to pay attention to, and sometimes our brain plays tricks on us. Sometimes we notice things that aren't there, as in a false alarm. Sometimes we don't notice things that are there, like habituation to Mr. Davis's construction outside of his classroom. Okay, now there's something called learning-based inference. Basically, what that says is, and I'm going to take this a step further. I just watched a great video on YouTube, and you should watch it. It's basically saying that we hallucinate our conscious experience, that everything we're happening right now is technically a hallucination. I don't want to get into it right now, but it's by a neuroscientist in England, and it's fascinating. You should watch it. But part of the point that I was talking about in a previous video, your brain is in a locked room. So how will it decide what's going on out there? Well, it takes a lot of work to do computations. So your brain says, I'm going to conserve energy and I'm going to make guesses on what I've already learned. So our perception is primarily based by learning. If a ball is coming at us, We don't have to track it all the way in. We've seen balls flying toward us before, and we can catch it because we can infer what's going on. So learning-based inference basically says that a lot of our perception is based on guesses, is based on things that we've learned, and we say, well, I've seen this a million times before, so since this is the millionth first time, I can probably make the assumption that that's going to happen again. But sometimes that screws us up. So if our expectations determine perception, if we have a perceptual set, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples coming up, I can trick your perceptual set. I can set up an expectation and screw you up. I can set up, do the opposite. Here, I'll show you an example of both of them. I love this one. What does this say? Now, of course, all of you are saying it says 13E, home, 13Y, 5B. Haha, I'm messing with you. The thing that I'm trying to point out is this 13, this 13, this 13 are all the same. So it can be a B or it can be a 13. Now, because we know that this is probably a word, we perceive that as a B. Because we know that this is a word, we perceive that as a B. Because we know that that is a time, we perceived that as a number. It was not hard for you. Your brain didn't go, does not compute, beep, 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 and then explode. You figured it out. Why? Because you had an expectation. You knew what to expect. Top-down processing, like we talked about earlier. So much of your day is top-down processing. But when something screws up and then we have to go bottom up, that's more work. So your brain is lazy. It likes top-down processing. Perceptual set says what you've learned is probably what you're going to see. Now, I'm not going to do this one because it's going to take too long. This is something I do in class. So I would say half the class do one and half the class do the other. So I'd say, okay, this side of the class, unscramble these. So it'd be bull, camel, skunk, mouse, zebra, ape. Okay? Then I'd say, okay, now you put your head down or look away. And then the other side of the class, do this one. And you'd say corn, onion, tomato, pepper, beet, pea. And then I would ask the class to unscramble that. And what had happened is this side of the class, more often than not, unscrambled it as ape. Why? Because I had given them the perceptual set, the expectation, the learning that they were all animals. This side of the room had unscrambled it as pea. Why? Because top-down processing, perceptual set, I had led them to the expectation that this was going to be a vegetable. So again, we perceive to some extent what we expect to perceive. All right. And then we'll do this another time. So we're talking about perception. Is there such a thing as ESP, extrasensory perception? Well, the jury's out on that. Maybe some fun day. Actually, the jury's not out, but I'd like to mess with you at some point, but it just takes too long to do it. So someday, maybe when we have an extra 10 minutes, you can remind me or Mr. Davis, and we'll do this fun experiment. Okay, so really now we're going to start talking about, to a very basic extent, the anatomy and physiology of our five senses. How do we hear? How does information get from out there in the world? How do we translate electromagnetic signals into neural signals that go to our occipital lobe in the brain? How does that happen? I don't know if you've ever thought about that before. It's actually pretty fascinating. It's amazing we perceive anything when you look at how complicated some of this stuff is. Okay, I would love to, we're going to start talking about vision, and I would love to show this, but because of the way this visual thing works, it doesn't show. But there's something called the McGurk effect. And the McGurk effect basically proves that our visual system overrides our other senses. So what it does is I'm going to explain it to you, and even if I explain it to you, you still won't be able to unsee it. If I say ba, 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 you'll see me as saying ba, ba, ba. But if I take the ba and I superimpose that sound over somebody going fa, 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 but the sound is ba, 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 you will hear fa, 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 because your visual senses override your auditory senses. Vision is king, is really what the McGurk effect, or queen, the regent, if you will, of the senses. So the McGurk effect, and we'll show you the video, it only takes a couple of minutes. It shows that vision is sort of the most important thing. Vision can even override our sense of touch. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to let Mr. Davis pick it up from here. I would have all of these different things laid out. and I would have you guess how much each one of them weighs. And what I would prove is if something were really big, but it didn't weigh much, your brain made the calculation and underestimated its weight because it was less density. I know that's kind of hard to explain. Maybe if we get back in person later on, hope somebody's keeping track of all these things where we say, this is what we do in class. And we say, well, let's do it. This is fun. But what it basically proves is when you see something that is less dense and then you pick it up, your vision still overrides your sense of weight, and it does calculations for us. So again, this experiment would prove that vision was king. All right, Mr. Davis, take it away.